Imagine the world in the palm of your hand. Anything you could want, just a few clicks, a few scrolls, a few check terms and conditions. But then suddenly, those same hands become shackled to the very things they reached for. Often, this is a core principle of the cyberpunk genre, and while the neon cities, pumping synth music, and tears and rain all look good on the screen, the irony is that it works on us as well as it works on all the denizens of its world. We fall into the illusion of the cool, the better, the seductive, just as the megacorporations want us to, lulled into a calm refrain as the cattle bolt inches closer and closer to our flayed and exposed skulls. The exploration of the exploitation of power over the powerless, central to any good cyberpunk narrative, is what stands out to me in the quest titled Star-Crossed Lovers in the 2017 game Dex by Dreadlock Ltd. In Dex, players take on the role of the titular heroine as she navigates the corrupt and vice-filled city of Harbor Prime in search of answers to her place in this nebulous and dangerous web of rogue AIs, brutal megacorporations, unshackled netrunners, and roaming gangs scratching out meager existences. While the main questline takes Dex across the entire city and engages her with a few different characters and factions, Star-Crossed Lovers introduces the themes of the main narrative on a smaller scale, but in a way that never loses its greater relevance. Touching on themes of exploitation, identity, abuse of power, and even elements of human augmentation, Star-Crossed Lovers sits as one of the more nuanced and complex quests in the game, which is what we will be looking at today. How can we go through Star-Crossed Lovers with the benefit of hindsight and expand its already rich gameplay into a quest that allows for even more player expression and relation to the main narrative themes? Let's take the plunge into cyberspace on this episode of Anatomy of a Quest. I think the developer's intention to place this quest so early in the game was very deliberate. Given the weight and complexity of themes found in cyberpunk settings, it can be easy to inundate players with a deluge of information that causes them to just glaze over and run through quests mindlessly. So as such, by presenting a much smaller and more personally focused quest in front of the players early, it helps guide them along the thematic path that will be explored in depth later. This developer insight also extends mechanically. Though Dex is a smaller game and less complex than a bigger AAA title, it is still an RPG at its core. By putting a quest with extensive usage of skills other than just click on head first and foremost, it once again primes players to think of alternative playstyles and builds as opposed to combat only. Lastly, the different endings to the quest, while simple, still foreshadow the resolution of the main quest, which will also require the players to choose between such differences. So it's clear that all the parts for a great quest are present, but how exactly does Dex set them up for player experimentation and exploration? Players start by stepping out into the Taijo district of Harbor Prime, a fairly poor area that borders the more dangerous districts of the west of the city and the more commercial and affluent areas of the east. The cold grays and pallid tones of steel and concrete are broken by this warm outline of a building to the player's left, drawing them out from the streets. In addition, players are also drawn to the missing persons poster to their immediate right. Entering reveals that this is the restaurant of Chun Tao, the hostess and assumed owner of the establishment. If players had collected the poster from outside, bringing it up in conversation with Chun Tao reveals that her brother Shen has been missing for nearly 2 weeks, having disappeared without so much as a word. Further inquiries inform the player that prior to his abscondence, Shen became completely infatuated with a woman named Lily. This caused all manner of changes to Shen's personality, causing him to start flexing on customers and embody more hedonistic behaviors and tendencies. While Chun Tao suspects Lily has some ulterior motive for Shen, she can neither prove it nor tell us exactly where Lily is. However, she does inform us that one of Lily's associates, Charlene, works in the Chinese district of the city, only one district over from the restaurant. This brings us to one of the first points of developer expertise in this quest, where player choice and thought is really accounted for. Players are completely free to explore the city and pursue leads, and in doing so with the right specs, can discover and break into Charlene's apartment in the downtown district without ever meeting her. Additionally, speaking to a dealer named Speedy also grants players the specific location of her apartment. Breaking into Lily's apartment reveals email correspondences between Lily and herself, which directs players to Lily's ultimate location, the brothel Aphrodite, in the Afterlight district. Alternatively, locating Charlene in a tucked-away area of the map gives the player the option to take Charlene up on her services, or, again, if players have spec'd into speech, the option to convince her to tell them what she knows about Shen and Lily. But once again, all roads lead to Aphrodite. Stepping onto Afterlight Boulevard feels like stepping out of cold rain. While the utilitarian brutalism of the city never fully leaves, there is a pervasive usage of inviting and disarming colors and advertisements that draw players forward until finally they reach the brothel. Now, arriving at Aphrodite is certainly striking. Barring the goofiness of the dancers, the entire building floods the screen with a warm and disarming light that contrasts against the frigid lifelessness of the rest of Harbor Prime. I also don't think that it's a coincidence that both the restaurant and the brothel use nearly matching color palettes in their design. Players may converse with Lily, the maitre d' and presumed owner of the brothel, to learn about the history of her business, as well as the option to hire the brothel's services for the evening. And one of those service providers is Shen. Reaching Shen is a twofold task. First, if the player reveals their intention to Lily early on in the conversation, she rather confidently offers players the option to try and convince him to leave, provided they pay for his services first. A potential speech check can reduce the price, but failing that, players must pay a rather high sum of credits to get to Shen without having to sneak into his room. This interaction plays double duty here, both providing an alternate route mechanically, but also revealing Lily's and really the world's character. People have a cost and a price. Humanity, it seems, is negotiable. Stealth and hacking are always an option here too, but given the number of cameras, turrets, and the bruiser-type guards who can't be choked out from behind, entering combat in this section can be challenging for an early-level character. Following up reveals that Shen is what Lily describes as a flesh and blood. That is to say, a person with no augmentations of any kind. In Harbor Prime, people of this nature are highly sought after like a rare commodity and often coveted in this kind of disgustingly predatory fashion. This state of the world creates this complicated dilemma that Shen is currently finding himself in. What happens when your natural proclivities and talents draw you to something that may promote or involve you in a harmful, manipulative, or otherwise dubious venture? Much like a talking head on the news or a YouTuber promoting product after useless and wasteful product for just a few dollars, what does one do when their path of mastery is sown with broken shards of deception and landmines of exploitation? It's worth noting here the other brothel worker that Dex can visit is a man named Tushan, who is himself not a flesh and blood. Speaking with him about Shen reveals an interesting twist in this very heavily augmented world, that the natural and unfettered body of Shen is actually threatening to someone like Tushan in this industry. While he self-assuredly shrugs off this idea of obsolescence, I don't think it would pass a more observant player that, combined with the document about the popularity of flesh and bloods that's in Tushan's room, this is no coincidence. Additionally, after finding Shen in the brothel, talking with him reinforces this theme of power over the powerless via his own motivations for prostitution. Having always felt a sense of misplacement in the family kitchen, Shen took pride in himself and felt that his talents were being squandered. He even says as much, revealing that his sister's motives for having him return to the kitchen may not be so heartfelt. However, players can remark that his tone and demeanor are both off, foreshadowing another angle to completing the quest. Shen has clearly been hooked on drugs to keep him complacent and bound to Lily, first through grooming and then through addiction. A relatively simple speech check can convince Shen that he should leave this job and head home. But two things are interesting here. One is that the player can actually fail this check, leading to another leg of the quest. And two, one of the resolutions involves the player lying to Shen and then covering it up. This remark about Chun Tao's cancer is a clear fabrication used only to guilt Shen into actually leaving. While certainly nowhere near as manipulative as drugs or grooming, it's interesting that players can perpetuate the cycle of power over the powerless that landed Shen here to begin with. Players who fail that speech check, or are a bit more inquisitive even, can discover and hack into Lily's personal PC, which reveals her true plan for Shen, shipping him off to some sort of drug-addled sex island for this mysterious buyer whom we never meet, named Frank. The email also implicates Charlene in the ring as a scout for new arrivals at Lily's brothel. A quick puzzle in the room, wonderfully but subtly foreshadowed by the lobby, unlocks a safe that contains a few items, including the drugs that Shen has been addicted to, as well as the pills that will help him with withdrawals. Returning to Shen with the email then guarantees his exit from the brothel. However, returning Shen home is not quite the final step to completing the quest. Lily's talons are deep within Shen, and the withdrawals to the drug Exalta are severe, potentially severe enough for Shen to contemplate returning to Lily. To earn the final ending for star-crossed lovers, players must give the anti-Exalta pills from Lily's locker to Chun Tao, who thanks them for all the help they've given to her and Shen, rewarding players with credits and a pretty sizable chunk of XP. Interestingly, players are given the option to sell those pills rather than give them to Chun Tao, which does complete the quest. However, it leaves Shen's road to recovery in question. As stated before, Star-Crossed Lovers is a simple yet solid quest. Shen is a character who is clearly struggling at a personal crossroads, and the forces that pull on him each have their hooks in different spots. The mechanics of play are all accounted for and provide multiple options and solutions for players. But with the benefit of a critical eye, how can we expand the options for player choice and expression even further, while also tying up a few of the looser threads in the plot? First off, the theme of family and personal identity is touched on but not thoroughly explored in this quest. As it stands, Chun Tao's want as a character is the safe return of her brother from wherever he's gone to. But why? I think adding an angle where Shen reveals that his sister has manipulated him into the family business would add another layer to the theme of power over the powerless. Maybe his sister sees the world outside of the family's control as hostile and dangerous, and whereas Lily is in this for wealth at any cost, Shen's sister sees this as a means to safety at any cost. To help facilitate this, I would add dialogue from Chun Tao about gangs or even corporations that have been increasing their influences in the Taizhou district. Or perhaps if pressed with a speech check, Chun Tao's facade of worry begins to crack and turn into this air of frustration at what she believes to be this selfish insolence on Shen's part. Maybe even she would have a line about how Shen is costing her sales and money, and that he owes it to her to repay what he's lost. Additionally, I think giving Shen a clear want outside of the restaurant that the restaurant has actively impeded would really help enrich his character. Maybe Shen went to school for a time for art or dance or medicine and was forced to drop out to help with the restaurant after their parents died, with the stress of his own want versus that of his family's need as a central catalyst for his fall into addiction. Keeping on the path of Shen, I think there should also be an option to allow players to keep Shen under Lily's thumb. Now, despite the moral dubiousness of allowing an exploited person to be left with their captor, creating an evil solution to the quest would reflect the greater themes of the main quest that will come into play later. Shen's sister is not easily swayed when the player tells her that he doesn't want to return. Essentially, she forces players to complete the quest in a way that, to me, doesn't feel natural. It feels a little bit like the hand of the devs are kind of guiding us so that we don't miss any content. But here's the thing, missing content is what makes what you do find even better. As such, I would have a branch of the quest that requires players to create like an AI deepfake or something, so that you can present that to Chuntao and convince her that while Shen is safe, he isn't going to come home. This would involve an extended cyberspace section where the player collects different data nodes from different levels, and then slowly forms those into a coherent likeness of Shen as they go along. Charlene could even play into this evil solution for the quest, where maybe she helps the player create the deepfake with another hacker friend that she knows, providing a route for players who maybe didn't spec as heavily into hacking. Following up on this, I'd have players then return to Lily and inform them that Shen is here for good, and that his sister thinks he is happy and working somewhere else. Next, Lily would provide the player with a unique stealth augmentation that creates a hologram double to distract enemies, allowing the player to escape combat more easily or pull off takedowns mid-combat. Additionally, Lily would become a more complete merchant and grant players access to her secret stash of smuggled goods, which presumably she's getting from Frank. And on the flip side of this, I would also embed a similar way to solve the quest along the good path, by having the conversation with Tashan require a speech check that explores his jealousy of Shen and how Tashan secretly wants him gone and wants to steal away his clients. This new deepfake, provided by Tashan as blackmail against Lily, would then be used to falsify a conversation in which Lily talks about how much she actually hates and just wants to use Shen and doesn't love him. To come back again to Charlene, she's a character that feels a bit thin and underdeveloped to me. Though she does perform a sinister role in the main quest, functionally targeting those whom she thinks would be easy prey for Lily, one could argue that she's just as much a victim of circumstance as Shen. I have my doubts that anyone would willingly choose to be a drug-addicted prostitute if they had such a choice. However, the main issue is that the game doesn't give players any insight into that possibility, nor any way to discover whether or not this is even the case. She only functions as a means to get to another stage of the quest, rather than a character who may be in a similar position to Shen. To help expand this, I would design a path where hiring Charlene for her services with a maxed out speech would prompt the player to ask her how exactly she arrived to work for Lily in this way. Maybe just like Shen, Charlene works the streets due to a dream that had to be put on hold for daily living, such as school or maybe even a previous career that was uprooted by a corporation. Upon completing the quest and freeing Shen, returning to Charlene again would give players two options. One is to give her a large chunk of credits to fund her return to school or even to restart this theoretical business that she may have lost. Or, number two, players get the option to buy out her contract or her debt with Lily and have her placed in a higher position in another company or corporate setting perhaps, with Lily using her connections to do so. However, this second option, while cheaper, is only available if the player was able to ghost their way into Shen's room, thereby impressing Lily with their skills and the lack of collateral damage in achieving their goals. This pathway would grant players access to Charlene's hacker friend, who would function as a second implant clinic at a discount rate, or maybe one who sells unique implants to the player that they can only gain there. Lastly, I think the ending of the vanilla quest structure, where the player has to use the safe and then obtain the anti-Exultra pills, is a little too linear for my taste. It takes what is a really cool puzzle, the statue safe, and it makes it into this mandatory step rather than this optional route for observant and smart players. To help remedy this, I would design a route where talking with Speedy about the pills opens up a quest branch where he tasks the player with recovering a stolen shipment from a gang apartment in the downtown district. Recovering his stolen loot would then grant players the anti-exultra pills for Shen, plus a piece of info about Charlene and her past, which would then help the player in convincing her to leave working for Lily. At its core, I think Dex is just really cool. Like, it's the kind of game that as a kid or a teenager, I would go rent or I might buy on a Steam sale and really have no idea what to expect, and play it for that whole weekend straight, and then just spend the entire week thinking of it at school or just when I have free time or daydreaming. It would just stick with you. It'd kind of be almost like an earworm, but for a game. That's really how I felt about Star-Crossed Lovers. Initially, I had picked the game up a few years ago on a GOG sale, and I remember loving it then. It was awesome. And now that I've gone back to get some more footage for the quest, I found it really does still hold up all these years later. The mechanics do a good job of supporting player expression and solutions. Shen is sympathetic and troubled as a character, and then Charlene and Chuntao are both relatable, but they're also kind of nefarious and a little bit mysterious because you don't ever really get a full picture of what they want and what their deeper goals are. And then Lily is this cold, laconic, calculating, just completely indifferent, you could say person, but she feels almost more like an entity, like a stand-in, a personification of all these ideas of the city. So to wrap everything up, Star-Crossed Lovers is a wonderful example of everything this game has to offer, and I really think it does stand as exemplary design. So thank you to everyone who took time to come by and check out this video. And if this analysis of Star-Crossed Lovers proved as engaging for you as the quest design was for me, I invite you to tune in again for more deep dives into your favorite quests, missions, and stories on Anatomy of a Quest.